Hello everyone and welcome back to Retro Legends. In 1985, the video game industry wasn't in the middle of a boom. It was recovering from a collapse. Two years earlier, in 1983, the North American market had collapsed under the weight of too many games and not enough good ones. People just didn't trust video games anymore. Home consoles seemed like just a passing trend. Stores had really cut down on how much space they gave to video games. Many experts thought the whole video game business was over. Yet, in that very year, something changed. 1985 wasn't just a moment of recovery, it was a year of redefinition. In those 12 months, the foundations were laid for what would become the modern model of the video game industry. Quality control, recognizable mascots, structured design, targeted marketing, and a closed but stable ecosystem. It wasn't a sudden boom. It was like carefully putting things back together. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more trips into the world of old-school gaming. Let's get started. In 1985, the video game market in the United States was still really shaky. A lot of companies, both those making game systems and those making games, had gone out of business. This made people feel really unsure about the whole industry. All those game systems and cartridges that didn't sell became a sign that the industry was seen as not very stable. In 1985, getting games into stores was a big problem. Big stores had much less space for video games and were putting more focus on things like VCRs, stereos, or personal computers. These were seen as useful tools, not just for fun. But video games were thought of as risky products that would only be popular for a short time and then quickly lose their value. The damage wasn't just about money. It hurt their good name too. Many people had bought games that weren't very good in the years before, and they ended up with games that were unfinished or had lots of problems. Because there were no rules for how good games had to be, people stopped trusting the whole video game world. Just because a game cost a lot didn't mean it was going to be any good anymore. The way things were made also showed some big problems. It was super easy to put out new games, which at first seemed like a good thing. But it led to way too many games being made without any plan. With no limits on how many games could be made and no one in charge, the market got completely out of whack. It became impossible to guess how many games would sell, and making too many games just made the losses even worse. At the same time, home computers had solidified their position. They offered diversified software, the possibility of autonomous programming, and a more serious image in the eyes of families. In comparison, consoles appeared as single-function devices linked to a sector that had just collapsed. In this situation, the problem wasn't that people didn't want fun, interactive games. It was about whether they could trust the people selling them. People didn't completely stop being interested in video games. They just stopped trusting the games that were out there. For this reason, in 1985, the main goal wasn't really about making things technically better, but about building a trustworthy system again. This meant changing how the people who made games, sold them, and bought them all worked together. It meant setting clear rules for what could be sold, selling fewer items to make them seem more special, and showing everyone that things were being checked for quality. The new start didn't come from saying the games were super powerful. but from promising that things would be steady and reliable. In a world where things were still a bit shaky, trust became the most important thing to get back. In Japan, the family computer had already been launched in 1983. But it was in 1985 that the Nintendo Entertainment System was distributed in the United States on a significant scale after a testing phase in 1984 in New York. The distribution of the NES in the United States did not happen with an immediate national rollout. After the limited test in New York in 1984, Nintendo adopted a gradual expansion, carefully monitoring the reactions of retailers and the public. The goal was not to saturate the market, but to demonstrate that the product could generate constant turnover without accumulating unsold inventory. The words they chose were a really important part of their plan. Not using the word console wasn't just a small marketing detail. It was a way to get around buyers who might not want to buy it. By calling the NES a home entertainment system, they made it seem like it belonged with other electronics in the living room, which helped people forget about the recent big problems in the video game world. Even the way you put the game cartridges in, which was like how you put tapes into a VCR, made it feel familiar and easy to understand. Nintendo launched the system with cool extra parts like the ROB robot and the Zapper light gun. These things made people see the system as more than just a game console. It was a platform that could do many different interactive things. It wasn't just about the game cartridges. Having these extra parts also helped show how different the NES was from older game systems. This made it clear that Nintendo was bringing something new and exciting, but in a controlled way. The licensing system was the core of the industrial strategy. Other companies had to agree to strict rules that limited how many games they could make each year, and made those games only for Nintendo for a while. Nintendo made all the game cartridges themselves, so they could control exactly how many were sold. The 10NES chip was the tech tool they used for this plan. It stopped games that weren't approved from working, making sure only official games could be played on the system. This kept too many games from flooding the market and helped keep the games feeling special and valuable. The combination of hardware control, restrictive contracts, and centralized production transformed the console into a closed yet stable platform. This was not just a simple anti-piracy protection mechanism. It was the structure that allowed for predictable supply management, avoiding the imbalances that had contributed to the crash. In 1985, the NES was not just a new device. It represented the introduction of a market governance model that would define the console industry for years to come. In 1985, Super Mario Bros. Was released. The game wasn't just a commercial success, it defined a language. It formalized a design method that would influence the medium for decades. The level design followed a progressive and measurable logic. The first scenario, which seemed simple, was actually calibrated with great precision. The first enemy forced the player to react. The first question mark block suggested interaction. The first mushroom introduced a permanent transformation of the character's state. Every picture you saw in the game taught you something. The spaces between platforms were set up so that jumping was a challenge, but not impossible or unfair. If you fell into a hole, you learned about taking chances because the bad thing that happened made sense. You didn't need a book to tell you how to play because the game itself showed you what to do. How things kept moving after you let go of the button was another special part of the game. Mario didn't just stop right away. He sped up and slowed down in the same way every time. This made the game feel more real, and controlling Mario felt more detailed than other games before it. When you pressed a button, the game always did the same thing, which helped you learn by playing over and over. The rhythm was also put together with great care. Parts where you could run freely were mixed with parts that needed more skill. The underground and water areas changed how the game felt for a bit, adding new twists without changing the main rules. Doing familiar things again with small changes helped the player remember things better. Symbolically, Mario became a stable point of reference. His graphic representation, simple yet recognizable, facilitated immediate identification. The consistency between the character, packaging, and advertising communication reinforced the perception of continuity. In a market that had just gone through a period of instability, this recognizability became a valuable asset. Nintendo introduced the Seal of Quality. This mark, printed on the packaging, indicated that the product had been approved by the company. The Seal of Quality acted as both a communication tool and a contractual mechanism. From the consumer's perspective, the mark represented a simple visual signal. The product had undergone an internal verification process. In a context where trust had been compromised, that symbol reduced uncertainty at the moment of purchase. From a business point of view, the seal showed a bigger system of control. Nintendo didn't just check if the games worked right. It set clear rules for how many games could be made, when they would come out, and how the game cartridges themselves were made. Other companies couldn't make their own games. They had to order cartridges straight from Nintendo, pay for them first, and agree to limits on how many they could get. This way, too many games didn't flood the market. By saying how many games each partner could release each year, Nintendo kept things balanced between what was available and what people wanted. The games kept their value because there weren't more games than people could buy. Controlling the amount of games also helped with their prices. Because there weren't too many games, stores didn't have to sell them for super cheap just to get rid of them. Keeping prices steady made people think of video games as something valuable that would last, not just something that would quickly lose its worth. This strict system made things a bit tough for other companies, but it also gave them a clear and growing place to sell their games. As more and more people bought the console, these companies had a bigger and more stable market to sell to, which was much better than before. The big success of the NES all over the world in the years that followed wasn't just because of one new idea. It was because this whole system worked so well together. In 1985, they set up the rules that allowed the system to grow in a controlled way, changing a messy industry into a well-organized market. While the home market was reorganizing, arcades continued to be a technological laboratory. In 1985, arcades maintained a clear technological advantage over the home environment. Arcade hardware could afford more expensive parts, more memory, and graphics that couldn't be copied on cheaper home consoles. This meant bigger characters, smoother movements, and richer sounds. Games like Gauntlet brought in a new idea. Up to 4 players could work together on one game machine at the same time. How the screen was shared, playing without stopping between levels, and using scores that depended on how long you stayed alive, all changed how arcade games usually worked. The game wasn't just about winning against others anymore. It became about working together and being part of a bigger system. Arcades were like a testing ground for new ways to play and trying out different kinds of games. People playing right away gave feedback, which helped quickly see if a game idea was good. But, because you had to put coins in, games were still made so players would finish quickly, with the challenge set for short playtimes. In 1985, a big difference in how arcade games and home games were thought about started to show up. Game consoles at home didn't just have to be smaller versions of arcade games anymore. Playing at home meant you could play for a long time, explore more, and have games that grew more complex. Since you didn't have to put coins in, game makers started thinking about different things when they made games. People started to see this difference too. Arcades were for quick, exciting fun, but home gaming could give you a continuous story. What people wanted slowly changed. They weren't just looking for games that looked exactly like the arcade versions. They wanted games made for playing at home. 1985 wasn't the end of arcades being the most advanced, but it showed a new path. Home games started to focus on stories and experiences that lasted, not just bringing arcade games home. This big change would shape how arcade games and home games competed in the years to come. In 1985, Sega wasn't yet Nintendo's main rival in the home console world in the West. That year, Sega mostly worked in Japan with systems like the SG-1000 and Mark III, but their products weren't sold everywhere, and they didn't have a clear plan for selling worldwide. The company was really good at making arcade games, but they hadn't yet made a solid plan to compete in the console market in other countries. Their presence in other countries was scattered and depended on local deals, without a way to get their products out to stores like Nintendo was building in the United States. In Europe, things were a bit different from North America. The home computer market was mostly taken over by cheap microcomputers, especially the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum. These computers weren't just for games, they also had educational stuff and ways to learn coding. This made it easier for families to say yes to buying one. Software often came on cheap cassette tapes. This helped many different people make games and created a lively group of independent game makers. This situation led to a market that was all over the place. There wasn't one big computer that everyone used, so developers, publishers, and regular people weren't all focused on the same kind of technology. Each computer had its own special features. This meant game companies had to make many different versions of their games and do a lot of tricky technical work to make them fit each system. The result was a lot of different products and no clear single market everyone could recognize. In 1985, the Commodore 64 wasn't new tech anymore. It was a well-known computer that lots of people had. The price kept going down because Commodore made their own parts, which made it affordable for many families. In many places in Europe, it was cheaper than other computers. This made it super popular, especially in the United Kingdom, Germany, and the Nordic countries. The games and programs were much better now. They weren't just simple arcade games or small demos. They were big projects made by special teams. Companies like Ocean, US Gold, and Epix made games based on movies or TV shows, and also new games just for the Commodore 64. It didn't take long to make these games, and using cassette tapes was cheaper than game cartridges. This meant there were lots of different games to choose from. From a technical standpoint, the SID sound chip continued to stand out for its tonal versatility and advanced modulation capabilities, allowing for recognizable and complex soundtracks. The VIC2 graphics chip, despite its obvious limitations in resolution and palette, offered hardware sprite management and fluid scrolling, elements that allowed for the creation of action games competitive with the home standards of the time. In 1985, the Commodore 64 also served as a learning platform. The integrated presence of the basic language and the availability of accessible development tools fostered the emergence of a generation of self-taught programmers. This characteristic distinguished the system from closed consoles, creating a hybrid ecosystem between consumption and production. The system did not focus on centralizing the offerings, but on widespread distribution and variety. This fragmented structure, supported by an active community and low costs, helped keep the Western market alive at a time when the console sector was still reorganizing. 1985 therefore represented the consolidation of an alternative model, not a platform controlled by a single dominant player, but an open, economically sustainable, and technically mature environment. The NES slowly started to bring in a different way of doing things. With just one main system, a way to get permission for games that was all in one place, and careful control over where games were sold, Nintendo began to focus its games on one main piece of equipment. This helped them make more things for less money, and talk to people more clearly. Having things all in one place didn't stop other companies from trying to compete, but it made things less scattered. Game makers and stores could all work with the same rules and know better how many games they would sell. After a while, this helped change the game console market into a system where only a few big game systems were in charge, instead of the many different ones that were around at the start of the decade. The Legend of Zelda was designed in 1985 with a different approach compared to the prevailing linear structure. The game world did not follow a mandatory sequence of levels, but presented itself as an interconnected map, explorable from the beginning with minimal restrictions. The absence of explicit instructions encouraged autonomous exploration and the gradual discovery of mechanics. The use of the Famicom disk system allowed direct saving of progress, overcoming the model based solely on scores or passwords. This technical choice changed the relationship between player and game time, making an extended adventure possible, not limited to short sessions. In the arcade world, Gauntlet formalized large-scale simultaneous cooperation. The management of 4 distinct characters, each with specific attributes, introduced a balance between complementary roles. The experience wasn't based solely on score competition, but on collective survival and shared resource management. This setup influenced cooperative design in subsequent years. Ghosts and Goblins, on the other hand, showed a way to make games hard but fair. If you got hit once, you lost your armor, and to see the real ending, you had to beat the game twice. This made you want to play again and again, but in a smart way. The spooky, old-fashioned look, along with how detailed the characters moved for that time, made the game look special and easy to spot. In 1985, some other really cool games came out too. Gradius, which was an arcade game, set the standard for how you could pick your power-ups. You could choose what upgrades to get and in what order, which added a thinking part to these shooting games. And then there was Hang On, with its special motorcycle-shaped game cabinet. It showed how the game machine itself could be a big part of the fun, mixing how you physically played with what you saw on screen. In 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System didn't immediately sell as many units as it would later, but the first sales were good enough to show that the idea was working. After starting in New York in 1984 and slowly spreading out in 1985, over 100,000 units were sold in the United States by the end of that year. By 1986, there were more than 1 million NES consoles in homes across the United States. This showed steady and controlled growth. Looking ahead, the path was clear. The NES ended up selling about 34 million units in the United States and over 61 million worldwide during its lifetime. Japan added to this with about 19 million Famicom units sold there. The NES became the top seller in North America by the end of the 1980s, holding over 70% of the market in the United States. Super Mario Bros. Was the main engine behind this growth. The game sold over 40 million copies worldwide, mostly because it came bundled with the console. It wasn't just a hit game, it really pushed console sales. People often bought the system just to get the game that came with it. In 1985, other consoles on the market were selling fewer units, or their sales were going down. The Atari 7800, which first came out in 1984 but was widely sold in 1986, sold about 3,700,000 units in total during its time on the market. The Atari 2600, though still around in smaller numbers, had already sold over 30 million units in total. But its yearly sales were much lower than before the big video game crash. As for Sega, the SG-1000 sold a total of between 1 and 2 million units, mostly in Japan. The Mark III, which came out in 1985 as a better version, made things faster, but it didn't really help them catch up to the Famicom in Japan. Sega's real big move to other countries would only happen with the Master System in the years that followed. In Europe, small computers were still the most popular. The Commodore 64 sold more than 17 million units around the world in its lifetime, while the ZX Spectrum sold about 5 million. These numbers showed that people in Europe were still playing games mostly on computers, not on game consoles. So, 1985 wasn't about huge sales right away for the NES. Instead, it was about growing steadily and carefully. The market didn't suddenly get super busy, it just became steady. What was different from before wasn't how fast things moved, but that they kept moving forward without stopping. The trust that was built up that year allowed the system to grow in a good way in the years that followed, turning an industry that was in trouble into one that was very successful. Nintendo was very careful. They sent out their products a little bit at a time. Stores were promised that Nintendo would buy back any games that didn't sell. Everyone shared the risk. This made store owners less worried, especially since they were still nervous after the big crash. Their success wasn't by chance. It was all part of a careful plan. In 1985, video games started to feel like more than just a quick game. They felt like a whole experience. You couldn't always save your game back then, but the way the worlds were built, with scores and clear goals, made you feel like you were part of a bigger story. Players weren't just dropping a coin in for a quick round anymore. They were sitting in front of their TV to explore a whole system. "1985 wasn't the year with the most new tech stuff. It was the year the industry figured out how to stay alive. Things like making sure games were good, having a closed system, famous characters, easy-to-understand design, and smart advertising. These things stayed super important for many, many years. 1985 didn't just erase the past. It put things in order. It showed that the industry could fall down and then build itself back up with stronger rules. That game design could be done in a planned way, that advertising could be smart, and that a character could lead a whole generation of players. It wasn't just a year of important releases, it was the year modern video gaming began to take shape. And from that moment, history never stopped. And with that, our trip down memory lane comes to an end. How many of these fun facts did you already know? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell so you don't miss out on more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Thanks for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.